Great, and I hope you have completed all the previous sections of .NET. Now we are on .NET Core section. This is again a very important topic and it's not optional, okay? If you already know about it, then great. But if you are new to .NET Core, then here is the chance to clear all the basic concepts of .NET Core. As usual, we will start with these 9 basic questions about .NET Core, and then in a progressive manner, we will cover questions on dependency injection and other topics in upcoming section. The approximate duration of all these questions is just around 17 minutes. What is .NET Core? See this diagram. .NET Framework and .NET Core are completely two different frameworks. Okay, Mono for Xamarin is also a different framework. It is used for developing mobile applications. All these frameworks are created by Microsoft only. Base class libraries are also different for all of these frameworks. Okay, from outside as a coder, you might think that base class libraries work very similar way for both .NET Framework and .NET Core. Yes, there are similarities, but still they are different for different frameworks. Okay, now here are some final points about .NET Core. First is .NET Core is completely a new framework. Second, it's free and open source flat platform. Third, it is developed by Microsoft. That's it. What is .NET Standard? First of all, .NET Standard is not a framework. Okay, many think that it's a framework, which it is not. Then what it is? If you see this diagram, here we have 3 frameworks developed by Microsoft. Now all of these frameworks follow some common rules, or you can say some common set of APIs. These rules are called .NET Standard, and if any framework will follow these rules, then it will be called .NET Standard compliant. Okay, so the definition is .NET Standard is a set of rules that is common across all .NET frameworks. What are the advantages of .NET Core over .NET Framework? Or what is the difference between .NET Core and .NET Framework? Very important question. Let's try to explore one by one. First advantage is .NET Core is cross-platform, which means it can run in multiple operating systems like Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. But .NET Framework can only be run in Windows operating system. Second advantage of .NET Core is it is completely open source, which means it is free to use, modifiable, and distributable. Okay. Whereas .NET Framework is not an open source. Companies have to purchase a license to run .NET Framework-based applications on their servers. For students, it's free. .NET Framework is also free, but not for companies. Whereas .NET Core is completely free, including for companies also. Remember, .NET Core framework is free, but the IDE Visual Studio is not free. Okay. Next advantage of .NET Core is hosting. .NET Core can be hosted in multiple servers like Kestrel, IIS, Apache, or Nginx. Apache is like for Java Pro, and Nginx is like for hosting Node.js application. Okay. But .NET Framework only supports IIS web server hosting. Another advantage is .NET Core have built-in dependency injection, which enables .NET Core applications to achieve loosely coupled design very easily, and reusable solutions which are easy to test. That is also an advantage of a dependency injection. Now, if you are new to dependency injection and loosely coupled design, then I will explain them in my dependency injection question also. Now, when we say that dependency injection is inbuilt in .NET Core, that means you can easily configure it in .NET Core, right? But in .NET Framework also you can use dependency injection, but you have to do some complex coding for implementing dependency injection in the traditional .NET Framework. Okay. Now the last advantage is .NET Core supports multiple IDEs like Visual Studio, VS Code, Mac for so multiple IDEs it can support. Whereas .NET Framework supports only one IDE, and that is Visual Studio. In some cases, .NET Core is also faster than .NET Framework. That is we can say also. So these are the advantages and the differences between the .NET Core and the .NET Framework. What is the role of program.cs file in ASP.NET Core? Whenever you will create a blank ASP.NET Core application project, then you will automatically get this file program.cs. Okay, here is it, program.cs file. The first point is program.cs file contains the application startup code, meaning whenever any request will come from the client, first it will come inside this program.cs file. Then here we have this main method, right? This main method of the program.cs file is the entry point of the application. You can say like it is the first method which get executed for any request. Then this create host builder method will build and prepare the hosting servers like Astral and IIS, and then it will run and call the startup.cs class file with the help of this use startup method. Okay, startup.cs file is the next file to be executed in the request pipeline. Do not bother about this lambda expression if you are new to it. Just remember that the program.cs file, from there we are calling the startup class, and this is the code of a startup class. Now this startup class have two main methods, configure services and configure method, which I will explain in upcoming questions. Okay, now one more thing, from .NET 6.0 the startup class code is merged into program.cs file only, and therefore there is no separate startup.cs class will be there. And program file will code will be something look like this. Then the configure services method is merged here, also the configure method also is merged here, meaning logical difference, there is no difference, but just all the things are merged into this main method only. Great, I think now we have discussed enough about program.cs file. What is the role of configure services method? This method was there in the startup class of .NET Core like this. This is how we configure services like inside the configure services method. Services.add controller. Okay. From .NET 6.0, the same services are configured directly inside the main method of the program class file. Okay. Now the question is, what is the purpose of adding these services like here inside the configure services method? Suppose, let's take an example. Suppose you are creating one e-commerce application, and these are the basic services which are required for your application: cart, payment, multiple languages support. Now inside the configure service method, you can add all these services like services.add payment, services.multiple languages like this. But when one request will come, it will access only one or maximum two service, like either payment or either adding our item to the cart, but not all of them, right? So the request will use only one of these services and rest of them will be optional and will not be executed. That's why the execution of configure services methods are optional. Okay. It's not mandatory that all of them will be executed. In the screenshot here, you can see we have added one service, add controllers with views, which will help controllers to run views in the application. Okay. But if client will request some HTML page like customer.html, then this service will not be executed. It's not required. So that's why configure services are optional. If you know about dependency injection, then you already know how to use configure services method to register the service dependencies. But yes, I will discuss them in dependency injection question. Finally, here are few points. Configure services is used to add services to the application. Next point is configure services method always execute before configure method. Okay. And the last point is configure services is an optional method. It's not necessary that all of its methods will be executed for a particular request. What is the role of configure method? In short, configure method will configure the request pipeline. See, this is the code of the configure method in a startup class. And these method app.use developer exception page, .use HTTPS redirection, app.use static files, etc., are the part of the request pipeline. Okay. And configuring this methods is the role of the configure method. Okay. So from .NET 6.0, the configure method is also removed, and these methods are directly placed inside the main method of the program file. Okay. Like this. Now, few more points about things are configure methods execute after configure services method. Okay. For each and every request, all the methods will execute inside the configure method in the same sequence. Therefore, no method is optional here. Like in the case of configure services, we have that optional scenario, right? These configure methods are also called middleware components. See the diagram, how the request will come and how inside the configure method request pipeline, all the methods middlewares will be executed one by one. That's all about the configure method. Describe the complete request processing pipeline for ASP.NET Core MVC. Now here you can see the flow of the request in ASP.NET Core MVC. HTTP request will start from the middleware. Okay, we already saw middleware configuration in the configure method of the startup class. We already know that. Then after middleware, then it goes for routing, meaning it will based on routing, it will decide which controller to go based on the controller name in the URL. Then request will initialize the controller, and then again based on the URL, it will decide which action method will be executed. Okay, so that is also from routing only. And then the result will be executed. After at last view will be rendered and the result as the response will be sent to the browser. That's it. It's very simple. Now in case of web APIs, only the view will not be there, but the rest of the things will remain same. Okay, only the view will not be there. In web API, JSON string will be sent back as the response to the request. So this is like a very high level idea of what is the request processing pipeline in ASP.NET MVC Core. What is the difference between .NET Core and .NET 5? Now, there are few points which we should remember about these two versions of .NET Core. So let's see them quickly. .NET 5 is the next major release by Microsoft after .NET Core 3.1. Now, the thing is, the word core is dropped from the name to emphasize that .NET 5 is the future of all earlier versions of .NET Core. Okay, so core is removed from the .NET Core. Okay, and second point is, Microsoft has introduced .NET 6, which is the latest version of the .NET Core. So that's it. It's basically .NET Core and .NET 5 are the same things. Just it's the latest version, and the core is removed from the name. What is meta package? What is the name of meta package provided by ASP.NET Core? Definition is meta package is a consolidated package of many dependencies. Okay, so here is the list of the dependencies which are consolidated in one meta package in ASP.NET Core project. And here is the screenshot. You can see the package name, the meta package name, and that is Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.app. Okay, this is the meta package. It is automatically added in this application by the .NET Core framework only. What it helps is it helps to do faster development as you do not have to include all the individual dependencies or the packages one by one. Okay, so this is the short story about the meta package. All right, now this is the most important part of .NET Core, dependency injection. Here is the list of questions. Here first we will understand dependency injection in general, and then we will see how to implement the dependency injection in .NET Core projects. All questions of dependency injections are covered here. The approximate duration of all these questions is around 15 minutes. What is dependency injection? Very important question. Let me first share the coding example, and let's see how to do without dependency injection, and how then we will see how to do the same thing with the dependency injection. Okay, then it will be clear. So listen carefully. See, here we have a salary class with calculate salary method. Okay, now we want to use this method in our employee class like this. See, here we are creating the object of the salary class and then calling the calculate salary method like this. Simple, everyone know this, and this is how what we do without dependency injection. This is how we are calling the method. Now we will use dependency injection, and here is the code. See, here we will declare one read-only variable of salary class. Then inside the constructor of the employee class, we will pass the dependency. What is the dependency? Salary. Salary is class. So we will pass this dependency, which is salary here, as an parameter. And then this local variable with underscore salary will be assigned that dependency, which we received from the salary class. Okay. So now our local variable is capable of calling the method of salary class like this. So this is dependency injection. Here the employee class is dependent on dependency salary class. Okay. And remember, the dependency salary class is injected in employee class through the constructor. Therefore, the constructor has a very important role here. Now, the most important question is why we are all doing all this. This is looks slightly more complex than normal object creation, right? Actually, instead of injecting the salary class, we inject the interface in actual .NET Core projects, okay? And that will give us more benefits like loose coupling architecture, easier unit testing, and many more. I will explain that in next question. But for now, you fully understand this definition. Dependency injection is a software design pattern in which we inject the dependency object of a class into another class. You know what is dependency object and how it is injected, right? Through the constructor, right? Now this is dependency injection in general, but in .NET Core we will use interfaces, and that I will explain with the advantages in the upcoming question. How to implement dependency injection in .NET Core? Let's start with the problem first. If you will understand what's the problem without the dependency injection, then it will be more clear to you. Okay. Suppose you are working in a project for an institution which provide coaching classes. Okay. Right now they are focusing only on maths classes. They want you now to create an application for managing maths class students. As a developer, you will create a class for math student class like this. This math student class will have a method get student count, which will return the number of maths students. Right now, just for simplicity, I hardcoded it as 50. Now to expose this method, you will create a controller which will return it to the view or web API. Okay. Like this as shown here. I named this controller as first controller for simplicity again, but the name can be different in real application. In this controller, you will simply create the object of math student class and call its method get student like this. This is the normal way of object creation, right? Now the problem is, after some months, your client or manager will ask you to replace this math student with the new science student class. Here is the new science student class. Now the method name is math student class and get student count, but the class is different. Okay, so the method name is same inside both classes, but the class name is different. So now what you will do, because your project has to be very flexible, right? It should accept any number of changes. So can it, like, now what you will do inside the first controller, you will simply replace this math student with the science student class. That is very simple. But in a big or enterprise level applications, there will be many controllers, like hundreds of controllers, which are also creating the object of the math student class. Now like this, we can have a second controller which is again creating the math student class and calling this method, and similarly we have many more controllers and all are creating the object. So if you will replace all the math student class with the science student class in all the 100 controllers, so much code changes are required for that, and I guarantee you will miss one or two of them, and then testers will grab your collar. Okay, so that is the problem, because for one change you have to do 100 at 100 places. So because more code and also more code changes will lead to more errors and more testing will be required, and this is the problem. And this is the problem we call tight coupling, because first controller class is tightly coupled with math student class. And here what we will do now with the help of dependency injection, we will do loose coupling between this first controller class with the math student class. Okay, so meaning we will code and design the controller in a manner so that there will be no code change required in the controllers. If we will replace the maths with science class or history class or any other class, no code change will be required in these controllers. Now so first step to do this is first we have to create one interface, that is iStudent like this, which will only contains the declaration of the method, this get student count methods, no definition, no implementation. Then inherit this iStudent interface in math student and science student class like this. See, the base class interface iStudent is added, nothing else. Now you have registered your iStudent interface with math student class in the startup class file configure service method like this. So you have to register your iStudent interface service. Okay, and the name of the actual service is math student. If you are new to add singleton, then don't worry, I will explain this in upcoming question, but here you can just understand that this is used to register math student class of iStudent type. This is the role of configure service method, to register the services. If you are using again .NET 6.0, then there you have to add the same thing in the main method of the program file. Okay, it means now what this means, what this adding the service here, registering the service, what does it mean? It means wherever iStudent interface will be injected, there math student class will be used. Okay, Now, your first controller code should not be creating the object of the math student class. Instead, the new first controller will look something like this. See here now, if you remember dependency injection concept, basic concept, then here we are injecting the dependency I student object in the constructor of the first controller class, and then we are calling the get student count method of this interface. Now, since math student class is registered with the I student, therefore here it will call the get student count method of the math student class only. Okay. See, as a result, first controller class now is not tightly coupled with math student class. How it is not tightly coupled? Because if now you will replace this math student class with the science student class, then that you have to need to change that's only inside this configure services method, not here inside the controllers. Now if your manager will ask you like any class update, so you need not to change the same thing in the second controller or third controller or any controller. Okay, you just replace math student with science student here in the configure services method only like this, and all the controllers where I student service was injected will automatically started using the get student count method of the science student class instead of math student class. See, only one word of code change and all your controllers will be referring to the new methods. You have saved 100 lines of code. If you see, we are not creating the object, rather injecting the interfaces, right? So that is the whole story, the tight coupling problem, and how we will solve this tight coupling problem with the help of dependency injection. Now, what are the advantages of using interfaces and loose coupling? That I will explain in upcoming question. What are the advantages of dependency injection in .NET Core? We already saw how to implement dependency injection in .NET Core and what is dependency injection, right? Basically, it gives you loose coupling between the services. Now, that is loose coupling will give you some advantages. So here are the 4 advantages below because of loose coupling. Flexibility. DI allows you to easily change the behavior of application without modifying its code. So by injecting dependencies, you can easily switch between different implementation of a service class. So as we have seen earlier questions that we can replace math student with the science student class, right? So that flexibility, that behavior can be achieved by the loose coupling only. Okay. So this is the first advantage. Second advantage is easier unit testing. DI makes it easy to unit test your code by allowing you to easily replace real dependencies with mock with the help of interfaces. So if you are aware about unit testing, then you know the role of the interfaces. Okay, with the help of interfaces, you can mock your classes. If you are new to unit testing, then it will be slightly difficult to understand. But yes, easier unit testing will be very easier if you will use the dependency injection in your project. Third advantage is independent modules. By separating dependencies, because it becomes easier to make changes to your code without affecting the rest of the system. So independent modules, like if you are doing some code change in one service, then other service you do not even need to test. Like if even they are both dependent on each other, still you do not have to change one if you are making the changes in another. So that is the advantage of dependency injection. And the fourth advantage is reusability. DI promotes the reuse of components by making them independent of their environment. This allows you to reuse the same components in different applications without modifications. So basically it is saying that when you will implement dependency injection, then that means your services are independent. Okay, so what happen, you can use one service in multiple another modules or another services. So that is reusability, and that is also promoted by the dependency injection. Great, I think now you have enough information about dependency injections, right? How to use dependency injection in views in ASP.NET Core? All right, we already know how to inject dependencies in controllers. For that, we have that iStudent interface. Then we have math student class which implement that interface. Then we configured or registered math student service in the configure method of the startup class like this. And finally, we injected the service in the controller like this, right? Up to here, I already explained in previous questions. Now, suppose we want to call this get student count method in the view rather than controller. Okay, what we will do then? For this, we will use this inject directive to inject the dependency services like this inside the views. And then we can call the method get student count from the object of the dependency. Okay, so the one-liner answer is a service can be injected into a view using the inject directive. Congrats for completing the last section. Now we have the .NET Core topics, service lifetime, middleware, and hosting. And here is the list of the 8 questions. Out of this add singleton, add scope, add transient, and then this middleware, and then run use map method. These questions are very, very important. The approximate duration of all these questions is around 15 minutes. What are the types of service lifetimes of an object instance in an ASP.NET Core? Now, if you remember, we registered the services, the dependencies in the configure service method like this. Okay. Now here, by using this add singleton, add scoped, or add transient method, you can set that lifespan of the object created for the science student class. Okay, meaning when a request will come to your application, and first time when the dependency of this service is injected or created, then what will be the lifespan of that object to student? Whether this object will be shared with multiple requests, or is it used for this request only, one request only, or it will live till the request is alive. So that will be decided which type of service lifetime you choose, add singleton, add scoped, or transient. Okay. So the simple definition of service lifetime is the service lifetime refers to the lifespan of the registered service or object you have created through this service. Okay, or you can say the service lifetime controls how long a result object will live for after it has been created by the container. Okay, and we have three types of service lifetime: singleton, scoped instance, and transient instance. In the upcoming question, I will explain all of the three of with examples. What is add singleton, add scoped, and add transient method? Very important question this is. Let's try to understand add singleton first. And if you know singleton design pattern, then it's very easy for you. Okay. The definition is add singleton method create only one instance when the service is requested for first time, and then the same instance will be shared by all different HTTP requests. Okay. Remember singleton pattern? That is almost same. Here in the diagram, you can also see only one instance is used throughout the application lifetime, right? Now let's see when we need this singleton practically in real applications. Suppose you create an application and you want to log all the application exceptions or informations in a text file. Now what you will do, once a request will arrive, you will write the code that if any exception occur, then open the text file and write the exception, right? For all other requests also, you will not open the text file again. Rather, you will use the same open text file and add and update the new errors in the same log file from the different request. In these kinds of cases, you will use add singleton. Why? Because multiple requests have to use this same log file, right? Like here we are registering the logger service here, then we are not creating the same class instance for different requests. Okay, same object instance will be shared between multiple requests for this. Now the next one is add scoped. Add scoped method creates single instance but per request. For every individual request, there will be a single instance or object. See the diagram here, one object, one instance per request here. Okay. The real application uses, suppose there is a payment service in your application and you do not want that this payment instance of a particular request of a particular user will be shared with any other request, any other user request, right? That is payment, because different requests should have different object or instance. Payment information must not be shared. For this, you will register the payment service with the help of add scoped method like this. It will make sure the payment object or instance will only be available in the same request and will not be shared. Add scoped is the most used method also. So if you are confused which one to use in your application, then go for add scoped. The last one is add transient. Add transient instance will not be shared at all, even within the same request. Every time a new instance will be created. Now see the diagram. For same request, multiple instances of the same services are created at different points. The real application use, suppose your application gets data from multiple databases like this tenant A, B, C. Now you have one connection object in your request, right? One connection object you will create. Then you need to change the database connection string of the same object in the same request for different databases A, B, C to connect with, right? For that, you have to kill the first database instance and then create the new instance to map the new database. So why you will do that? So at that time, you will use add transient method, because in this, you cannot use the same database instance with the same request. Every time you need to connect with another database, you have to create the new object of the data access. New object is required inside the same request, right? Here is the code to register the data access service with the help of add transient method in your application like this. Great. I think now you know all the methods of service lifetimes and what are their real applications used, right? What is middleware in ASP.NET Core and what is custom middleware? Now, if you see this configure method code, and here we are calling several components like is development, use static files, then use routing, then use authorization, and at last use endpoints. All these just are middlewares only, okay? So just definition is a middleware is a component that is executed on every request in the ASP.NET Core application. So basically, whenever any request will come, then it will pass through all these middlewares and then it will go to the controller as per the URL, right? All these middlewares will execute it in the same sequence written here. Now, these middlewares are provided by .NET Core framework, but you can also create your own custom middleware class and add them here inside, like at the end of this sequence. So that is custom middleware. Now from .NET 6.0, configure method is not there anymore. So like this, the middleware components are added at the end of the main method of the program.cs file. So this is all about the middleware. How ASP.NET Core middleware is different from HTTP module. Now in ASP.NET Web Forms and MVC, if you remember, there were HTTP modules. Okay, if you are already aware about them, then that's great. Even if you are not, then no problem. Now you will know it. Okay, if you see this diagram, HTTP modules are the part of the request pipelines only. Okay, so HTTP modules are nothing else, but they are almost like middlewares only. In .NET Core, instead of HTTP modules, we have middlewares as the replacement. Okay, so the main difference between them is HTTP modules are registered in the web.config file or global.asx file in the ASP.NET framework, while a middleware is registered via configure method inside the startup class. Short and simple difference. What is request delegate in .NET Core? The simple answer is request delegate are used to build the request pipelines. This is the diagram of request pipeline. Here you can see a HTTP request is coming, and then inside the configure method it is visiting three middlewares. Okay, middleware 1, 2, and 3. This we call a request pipeline. Okay, this is request pipeline is nothing. It's a virtual pipeline which contains the middlewares only. Now the question is how this request is going from one middleware to another middleware and finally stopping at the last middleware. How it is working? That is managed by the request delegates. The next important point about request delegate is request delegates are configured using run, map, and use extension methods. In the upcoming question, we will see how this run, map, and use methods work in the request pipeline. What are run, use, and map methods? Very important question. Let's start with the use method. Okay, here inside the configure method, first we are calling the use method and then run method. Now if you see the output, both lines are printed from both these methods, right? That means after executing the use method, the next run method is also executed. So the purpose of use method is to run the method first and then pass the control to the next method in the request pipeline. That's why both executed. So the definition of use method is for any request, use method will execute the middleware component and then pass the execution to the next middleware component. Okay. If you remember the default configure methods provided by .NET Core, here you can see we have use static files, use routing, use authorization, like prefix with use, because they run and then they send the execution or control to the next use routing, use authorization like this. So while they are, this is the explanation of the use method. Now the next method is run method. Now here see the example code. Okay, here inside the configure method, we are calling first run method and then again run method. So now if you will see the output, only the first line is printed and second line is not. The reason being is the run will immediately terminate the execution after the first method, and it will not pass the control to the second method or component or middleware. That's the reason why we put run method at the end of the request pipeline like this. Now because after that there is nothing going to be executed, that's why. The definition is run method will execute the middleware component and then terminate the execution. It should be placed at the end of the pipeline. Okay. Last one is map method. Here is the code of map method, and it says if the request URL has something like auth in it, then go inside, otherwise not. For example, if this is the URL and it has auth in it, right, then you will get this output because it will pass the control inside. The map method will, and the run method will be executed and the string is printed in the output. But if in the URL, if there is no auth string like this, then map method will not allow the execution to go inside, and therefore inside the method will not be executed. And in that case, there will be nothing is printed here. Okay, so this is map. The definition is the map method is used to map a specific request URL path to the middleware component. Great. I think now you know all of three of them, run, use, and map methods, right? What are the types of hosting in ASP.NET Core, or what is in-process and out-of-process hosting? Before understanding Kestrel, one must understand in-process and out-of-process hosting. Okay, let's try to understand with the help of a diagram. Here you can see in-process hosting is related to IIS. Okay, in this only one web server is used for hosting, and that is IIS. And the name of the process is w3wp.exe. The other type of hosting is out-of-process hosting, and it is of two types. In first, the ASP.NET Core uses Kestrel as the hosting server. And in second, IIS and Kestrel both are used, where Kestrel is used as the reverse proxy configuration. Okay, so one has to set the values of this ASP.NET Core hosting model property to in-process in the project file. Okay, let's summarize the differences between in-process and out-of-process quickly. In in-process hosting, process name is w3wp.exe, and out-of-process hosting, the process name is .net.exe. In-process hosting, only one web server is used, and that is IIS. In out-of-process hosting, two web servers can be used. One will Kestrel and other can be anyone like IIS, Nginx, Apache, any other. Now in the upcoming question, we will see some more details about Kestrel. What is Kestrel? What is the difference between Kestrel and IIS? Let's see the definition of Kestrel first. Kestrel is a cross-platform web server for ASP.NET Core. Second thing is it is a type of out-of-process hosting, okay? Meaning Kestrel can be used alone or it can be used with IIS or Nginx web servers. Now let's see the differences between Kestrel and IIS. First, Kestrel is a lightweight web server used for hosting, whereas IIS is a complete web server which is also used for hosting, but it can handle complex operation and it is configurable also. Now here lightweight means some functionalities like load balancing are not available in Castrol, but yes, they are available in IIS. Second difference is Castrol is cross-platform and can be used with many other web servers like IIS, Nginx, and Apache. Okay, but IIS is not cross-platform and can only run in Windows only also. Next difference is Castrol is open source like .NET Core, free to use, but IIS is not open source and that is not free to use. That's are the differences between the two. Congrats for completing the last section, and here is the last section of .NET Core. In this section, we will cover questions on topics like routing files in .NET Core, cores, and some remaining questions also. Here is the list of 9 questions related to routing and cores, which are very important, and the approximate duration of all these questions is just around 16 minutes. What is routing? Explain attribute-based routing. Routing in ASP.NET Core. It is a very important concept in MVC and Web API. The simple answer is routing in MVC is the process of mapping a URL request to a specific controller action in a web application. Okay. For example, see this controller. Now, when the request will come, then by looking at the URL, .NET Framework will automatically identify that this home in the URL is the controller name and this index is the action method name. This automatic mapping via URL is routing. Now, some more points are the routing system is responsible for directing incoming request to the appropriate controller based on the URL. Second is the routing system is typically configured using a routing table which maps URLs to the controller action. Routing is automatically maintained by .NET Framework, so this routing table is also automatically maintained. Okay, you need not to write any code for this. Now the question is, what is attribute-based routing then? Now sometimes you want to modify this default routing mechanism. Okay, for example, in example here, this URL says that the request will go to the home controller and this action method name will be about. But in the code you can see we do not have any about method. But here we have one about one root attribute with this about in the name. Okay, but the actual method name is go to about. So this will redirect this attribute based routing will redirect this about to go to about action method. So that is what is called attribute based routing, because we are modifying the default behavior of routing by using this. The definition is attribute based routing is used to manipulate the default behavior of routing in ASP.NET. Great, now it's clear to you. Explain default project structure in ASP.NET Core application. Here in the screenshot, you can see the default structure when you will create the project for ASP.NET Core first time. Okay. Here we have www root. It stores static files of the applications like CSS, JS, images, all the static files will be reside there in this folder. Second important file is app settings.json. This stores the configurations like database connection strings and other things will be saved here. The configuration basically, which are required when the application is in running form. Then the third is the program.cs file. This is the entry point of the application. When the request will come, it will first go to the program.cs file only. Previously, there was a startup.cs file also, but from .NET 6.0, all the code of the startup has been merged to this program file only. Okay. Now, in case of web API, this views folder will not be there. And if you are again so this is like a very high level structure, and anyone can ask you like, what is app setting, what is program.cs file? So we should know what is the project structure. Again, a very small question, how ASP.NET Core serve static files? Now, when you will create the ASP.NET Core project, then you will automatically get this www root folder, right? Now, this will contain all the static files. Now, here is the use static files method inside the configure method of startup class. This will enable the static files to be served to the client. So that means if some client will request for .html page, then this use static file is the middleware here who is responsible for serving that static page to the client. Okay, and same is written here also. And you can also see that it is called even before the MVC controller and authorization. The reason is for static serving static files, no authorization is needed. Okay, it's just a static file. So that's why it is before the authorization. What are the roles of app settings.json and launch settings.json file in ASP.NET Core? Here is the app setting.json file screenshot present in the solution. It is in the solution, and the app setting.json file is an application configuration file used to store configuration settings, okay, such as database connection string or any application level global variables, etc. Okay. Here in the screenshot of this file, you can see how the connection string of database is stored here. Then what is launch settings.json file? If you will expand the properties of your project, then you will find this file. And here is the content of this file. Application URL is here. Then we have port here and hosting configuration. All this information is required when the application is launching or starting. Remember and listen carefully. carefully when the application is starting. That's why this file is called launch settings.json file. Now the definition is the launch settings.json file is used to store the configuration information which is used to start the ASP.NET Core applications. So app settings store configuration which are used when the application is in running mode, and launch settings store configuration which are used to run or start the application. Okay, one is used to start the application and one is used to maintain the running. Like sometimes you need a connection string, sometimes you need to connect to different database, different things for that app setting. So that is the app settings and launch settings file. Here is a short question. What are the various techniques to save configuration settings in ASP.NET Core? Alright, so what are the techniques? First and most important technique which we already know is app settings.json file, which is the default technique to save configurations like connection string and others. Okay, this is the first and default technique. Second technique is Azure Key Vault, which is mostly used when the application is hosted in Azure Cloud. This is the most secure way. Okay, and nowadays this is the this is very much in trend and every application is doing it. Then we have save settings sometimes in environment variables. Sometimes next is in memory .NET objects we can use. Then command line arguments we can use, and sometimes some custom providers also we can use. So out of these techniques, first two app settings.json and Azure Key Vault, these are the most popular techniques. What is course in ASP.NET Core? Why is course restriction is required? How to fix the course errors? Now, alright, this is a very important question and all three questions about course are at one place here. Let's see some points about course and then we will understand them with the help of the example, okay? So first thing is course stands for cross-origin resource sharing. It means course is a security feature implemented in web browsers that restricts web pages or scripts from making requests to a different domain other than that served the web page. So for example, if you have two domains, abc.com and xyz.com, so course will not allow abc.com to access xyz.com website. So that is like simply the course. But now let's see the example here. Suppose you have a web application like this, interviewhappy.com. Now, if you request the data within the same domain like this, then you will receive the data smoothly without any problem. But in our next four cases, interviewhappy.com will send the request, but it will not receive the response because of course. First case is when you want to get the response from a different domain altogether. Here you can see the interviewhappy.com requesting the data from different domain xyz.com. So by default, the response will not be sent and the error will be generated. Because course stands for cross-origin resource sharing, and that means cross origins means different domains will not share anything. Now in second case, when you want to get the response from a subdomain, so what is subdomain? Subdomain is putting API dot or something like this, anything before like a prefix. In that case also by default course will not allow the data sharing. Third case is when the domain is same but you are requesting from HTTP and the sender is HTTPS. And the last case is if the port number is different. In all the above four cases you will receive the course error. Okay, and here is the error. See, XML request at this URL from origin another URL has been blocked by course policy. Okay, this is the course error. Now the point is why course is required. Obviously because of security reasons. Okay, so that you can make your API more secure by default. Otherwise any external website can try to access your data, right? That is why by default it is required. Now sometimes we do not want this behavior. We want some external applications to access our data. For that we have to fix this course error in .NET Core. For that we have to do two things in startup class. First, add this ASP.NET Core.course nugget package to your project. Secondly, in startup class, edit the configure file and configure services file method like this. First, add this add code service in the configure services and then call middleware use course method like this in the configure method. This will make sure that any cross-domain application can access your application now. Okay, so that's how we will fix the course error. So now you know what is course, why it is required, and how to fix it if you do not need it. What is in-memory caching and distributed caching? In-memory caching is the normal way of caching. In this, cache is stored in the memory of a single or same server which is also hosting the application. Basically, the data is cached within the application. Okay. Distributed caching is when you want to handle caching outside of your application. A different server is used for stored cache data in distributed caching. Okay. In-memory caching can be implemented with the iMemory cache interface in ASP.NET Core. Distributed caching can be implemented with the help of Redis cache. What is Redis cache? Redis is an open source, highly replicated, performant, non-relational kind of database and caching server. See this diagram, the flow is same as of normal caching. Only difference is Redis cache server is not the part of application server. It is separate. Now the last question is when to use which caching. In normal cases where the application size is small, use in-memory cache, the normal way of caching. But where application size is very big or it's microservices based architecture, there you can use distributed caching to improve the performance. Okay. How to handle errors in ASP.NET Core. Now here I'm not talking about the exception handling, but it's slightly different. It is error handling based on the application environment, whether it is development, staging or production. That error handling I'm talking about. Okay. Now sometimes you want to see few things in development environment, but you do not want to see the same things in production or live environment. Okay. For example, if any error will occur while coding, when you are in development environment, coding environment, then you want to see the error page, right? So that you can fix that error, right? But you do not want to see the same error page in live environment. Otherwise, the actual users will also see the same error page. So for that, you set up some custom error page for live environment, right? So that separation between the development and production environment, that configuration can be set up here easily in the .NET Core project. See the code of a startup class configure method here. If the environment is development, then it will show the exception page. Okay. And if the environment is any other environment like staging or production live, then it will show the custom error page, which the name of the page will be error here. Okay. Now where to set whether the environment is development or production, that you can set in launch settings file. Remember, everything related to when the project is starting is that configuration is stored in launch setting. And here you can set the ASP.NET Core environment value to development and staging or production. If you set the environment development, then env dot above in the code env dot is development will be true. Otherwise it will be false. So that's about handling the error in ASP.NET Core. Here is a short question. What are razor pages in .NET Core? Now, similar to MVC, there is one more development model which is supported by .NET Core, and that development model is Razor Pages. So while creating your projects, you can select either MVC or either Razor Pages also. Now, the basic thing is Razor Pages follows a page-centric development mode, just like ASP.NET Web Forms. So if you are a fan of Web Forms, then you can pick this model for your next project, okay? So it supports all the .NET Core features because Web Forms are not there in .NET Core, but yes, these Razor Pages are very much similar to them. So you can use it.